Hopefully you completed your assignment for the first part of this lesson, which was to create a period and a sentence structure in the classical style. Now, I know that you have your own individual style, but in order to learn these concepts, we want to first start with where they originated. And all these phrases that we're talking about right now, the period, the sentence, the hybrid themes, these are very classical style pieces. And eventually these phrases, they developed and they were expanded. But what we want to do is go back in time a little bit, and we want to try and emulate another composer's style. That is a compositional technique in itself, because it helps you to better understand where the music came from, where these ideas came from, the structures that were used, and then you can slowly start to expand on these ideas. So make sure you complete a period and sentence structure in the classical style, and then when you've done that, come back here, and we're going to talk about one piece in particular. It's going to be Haydn's Piano Sonata in F. It's the third movement, measures 1 to 8. Now, the way it was written, this is a period structure, and we're going to talk a little bit about the period structure, but I'm going to show you what it could look like if it was modified into hybrid 1, hybrid 2, hybrid 3, and hybrid 4. So this is actually going to be a really fun lesson, and we're finally starting to get into this concept of form. Very, very shortly we're going to. So here we have this Haydn Piano Sonata in F. It's H9, third movement, measures 1 to 8. What I'd like you to do right now is just go ahead and analyze this 8 measure phrase. So you'll be able to pause the recording. But before you do that, I want you to include the basic idea, contrasting idea, antecedent phrase, consequent phrase, and complete a harmonic analysis. However, before you go ahead and complete that analysis, let's go ahead and listen to the example one time. Now that we've listened to the example at what could be considered a normal tempo, let's go ahead and slow it down and listen one more time. So let's talk a little bit about the music that you have in front of you. So I'm not going to go over any of these concepts here just yet, because I want you to figure them out on your own. At this point you should be able to. But one thing I want you to notice is there's really no dynamic markings, there's no articulations, there's nothing. And that was not atypical in the classical period. Often when you had dynamic markings in the classical period, they could indicate aspects of form. And they were certainly intended to be played at different dynamic levels, but dynamic markings were used far less commonly, and a large part of that has to do with the fact that there was a more universal style. People knew how to play the classical style, and so because of that, it wasn't as necessary to go in and mark every detail. In today's music, every piece is different. You have to go in and use dynamics and articulations, because there's a new roadmap for every piece that you put out there, and performers shouldn't be expected to intuit what it is that you want out of your piece, even if they're going to go ahead and create their own interpretation. That's what most of them will do, but give them a head start. Show them what it is that you want the piece to be performed as. And if you don't know how you want the piece performed, this is an important point. If you don't know how you want it performed, then you need to sit down and make sure you figure out your own interpretation. Pretend that you're going to play the piece. Because I truly feel it's unfair to give a piece to a performer that's new without any indication of how to play it. You need tempo markings, dynamic, articulations. You need all this stuff to make it easier to play. So in a moment, I'm going to have you pause the video and complete an analysis. If you're taking the group session or through UreMusic.com, you can download the sheet music to analyze. Otherwise, if you don't have access to the handouts, take a screenshot or just write this example out by hand. That would be even a better option. all of you could actually benefit from writing it out by hand. There's something about writing music out by hand that really helps you understand what's going on. So I want you to analyze all these components: basic idea, contrasting idea, antecedent consequent phrase, the antecedent cadence, the consonant cadence, harmonic analysis, and probably the very first thing you should do is indicate the key. So go ahead and pause. I'm going to give you 5 seconds, and then we're going to go on and talk about the analysis of this particular piece. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, pause. Here we go. All right, so there are some non-chord tones, but here is a harmonic analysis that you should have come up with. This entire first measure, the only notes in here are F, A, and a C. So this is very clearly a 1 chord because we have our 1 in the root, in the bass, right? The root of the chord is in the bass. We go into the next measure, and we have some non-chord tones. There's a B flat here and a G here. When you remove those passing tones, you end up with F, A, C again. So the 1 chord remains. Here, we have a C, an E, a G. This F would be a passing tone. The G and the E fit the chord. C fits the chord. G and the B flat at the end gives you the 7. So you can write 5, 8. You could even put a dash here and write 7 to indicate that the octave is moving into the 7th. Now, I didn't do that because we don't actually have the C coming down to the B flat. So to indicate that, I left out the dash line. But if you included it, it wouldn't be wrong. I just prefer to only use a dash line when you actually show that voice leading, and we don't actually have it here. So in the next measure, we have a 1 chord. You've got F, a C, another F. This is a series of non-chord tones we'll talk about in a moment, but here we have F, A, and another C. So this is clearly a 1 chord. What's happening here is if we go to the previous measure, this is actually part of the 7 chord. All these notes fit the 7 chord. So we can view this as a consonant preparation. This is a suspension. And the way we figure out what type of suspension, we go to the bass note. F to G would be a 9 going to an 8 above the bass. So you'd write 9, 8. And you go to the next one, you've got a 4 going to a 3 above the bass. F to B flat is a 4. F to C is a 3. So this would be a 9, 8, 4, 3 suspension. So you could write it as a 9 going to 8, 9-8, 4-3, and put a little S in front of it to indicate the suspension. So we have a preparation, a suspension, and a resolution. In the consequent portion of the phrase, again, just a 1 chord, really a mirror of what happened in the second measure. And then this changes a little bit, which is usually necessary, because when you're bringing about a cadence, you got to change some things. But notice what he does here. Haydn creates a stronger chord. Instead of having the triad moving into a 7th and a very weak beat, he puts your 7th chord right there on a very strong beat. So he makes a modification to make this cadence really strong. But he weakens it. He weakens it because even though we're going to consider this a perfect authentic cadence, we do have this E going to the F, we actually don't have stepwise motion into that F. And so that makes this a slightly weakened perfect authentic cadence, but I'm still going to view it as a perfect authentic cadence. Some theorists may argue with that. Some may argue in favor of a perfect authentic. Some may say, no, it's not a perfect authentic cadence. But effectively what's happening is we kind of have this prolongation from the G. We have a G here, a G here, and it resolves down here to the F. So that is stepwise motion. When you take it back to first species counterpoint, we still have that G on the downbeat resolving to the F. Those who are more literal minded will say, yeah, but there's a leap here. So since there's not stepwise motion into the scale degree 1, I'm not going to call that a perfect authentic cadence. So just know that there could be some arguments about that. If you were taking a graduate exam and there was an option to explain your answer, I would explain it in that way. Okay, so what if we took that period from Haydn and we turned it into a sentence structure? That's exactly what I've done here. I've taken the antecedent and consequent phrase, the basic idea, here's a contrasting idea, and I've repeated the basic idea. I've done it in a sequence, going from a 1 chord to a 2 chord. And then we don't have a cadence here. That 2 chord actually remains where we get a continuation. And then I liquidated some of the ideas here at the end. So I took the B flat here. I took the G that it skips down to because I heard the prolongation of the G. I still have it here. So it's still emphasizing this perfect authentic cadence. And then I'm emphasizing the E and the C, which are also part of the 5/7 chord. So I've liquidated what happened in this measure. So go ahead and listen to this, and then we're going to talk about it some more. So were you able to hear that pretty clearly? It had kind of a nice effect. You heard the period first, and then you heard it rewritten as a sentence structure. This is a really fun compositional activity that you can do. You can take your ideas, and if you find that they resemble a period or a sentence or a hybrid 1, 2, 3, 4, if that happens, try and write them in different ways. Try and write them in various structures. Or take a piece by Mozart or Haydn. Find a true period and then try and turn it into a sentence. It's actually a lot of fun, and you'll learn a lot about the construction of music just by doing that. All right, so very quickly, we want to just review the hybrid theme types. This is a slide from a previous time. Remember, hybrid themes are kind of our catch-all for what doesn't fit into a period or a sentence. We used to have contrasting periods, modulating periods, all this other stuff that didn't accurately explain what was going on. Hybrid themes allow us to categorize things more succinctly and give us a more definite definition for what these different phrases are. So if we say a hybrid 1, we know there's an antecedent phrase, so there will be a weak cadence here, followed by a continuation. So there'll be fragmentation, liquidation, increased harmonic rhythm, everything we expect in a continuation. In hybrid 2, same thing. It'll look just like a hybrid 1, but in the second part of the phrase, we get this prolonged cadential progression. Hybrid 3, compound basic idea. Looks like an antecedent, but a compound basic idea has no cadence. That's what makes it a compound basic idea. And I don't like that term because it kind of makes it seem like you have 2 basic ideas. And in fact, what you have is a basic idea and a contrasting idea. But what makes it somewhat compound, I guess, is that it doesn't go to a cadence and then it has to go on to the next part. So hybrid 3 includes a continuation. Hybrid 4, compound basic idea plus consequent. Okay, so now for the really cool part. All right, so here is an example of hybrid 1. So it has an antecedent plus a continuation. If we look at this, the first 4 measures, they are identical. Everything's exactly the same because we still have an antecedent phrase, basic idea, contrasting idea, weak cadence. So we have an imperfect authentic cadence here. Why is it imperfect? Because of that A. It's a 3rd scale degree. It's not an F. Also, metrically, it's on a weak beat, but that by itself wouldn't make it imperfect. What changes here is now, instead of going on to a consequent where we repeat the antecedent, essentially, we use continuation function. So we're going to have fragmentation here and liquidation here. So again, what I did was I liquidated the material in this measure. So it resembles the sentence structure version that I already created. But what I've done is I've attached it to the antecedent phrase. There's no sequential repetition, exact repetition, or statement response that you'd expect in a sentence, and it goes straight into the continuation. So let's go ahead and listen. You're going to hear the period first, and then you're going to hear this hybrid 1 theme. And you can just kind of listen to that and see how it changes the music just a little bit. Did you hear that? It's a pretty nice effect. So we have this antecedent phrase. We fully feel like we're going to be going on to a consequent, but then we get all this fragmentation, and really creates an interesting effect. So this is an example of how you could turn a period into a hybrid 1. And I hope this comparison helps you a little bit. So what changes? Cadence stays the same, both aspects of it. The antecedent phrase is still antecedent, but now we have a continuation. Remember, fragmentation. Increase of harmonic rhythm. It's moving way faster than the period version, right? And remember, increase of harmonic rhythm is relative. It's relative to, oh, I have one chord here, one chord here, one chord per measure. If you go to 2 chords per measure, that's an increase. If you have 2 chords per measure and you go to 3, that's an increase of harmonic rhythm. If you have 3, that's a fast harmonic rhythm. But if you have 3 and you go to 4, that's an increase. If you have 4 and go to 8 chords per measure, that's an increase. It's relative. Keep that in mind. Let's look at another version. So this is hybrid 2, an antecedent plus a prolonged cadential expression. So here we have the antecedent, again exactly the same as a period, and here we repeat the consequent phrase, but some notes had to change to fit our harmonic progression. So while this is still a consequent phrase, and it's still essentially mimicking what we have here, I had to change some material to make it fit my cadential progression. So we have a 1 chord, then we have a 6, 2, 5, and then 1. Normally, you'd expect this cadential progression from the predominant to the dominant to the tonic to occur in the last 2 measures, like we have here. Dominant, tonic. There is no predominant. But in a prolonged cadential expression, it occurs over the entire second half of the phrase, or maybe even the entire phrase. So this cadential progression helps to shape and give the piece kind of a more emphatic cadence in a way, because you know a cadence is coming, but the composer is making you wait for it. So let's go ahead and listen to this, and then we'll talk briefly about what it sounds like. So, did you hear that? It was kind of interesting, right? Because it sounded a lot like an antecedent phrase, but you could tell that there was increased harmonic activity pushing us into this final cadence. So you can really hear that cadential progression. So I included the 6 chord, which is a tonic substitute. It often comes before the 2 chord, then it goes to 5 and 1. So effectively have a tonic prolongation here, predominant, dominant, tonic. So hybrid 2, remember that. Antecedent plus cadential. So the first 2 hybrids use antecedent phrase for the first part. Hybrid 1 has a continuation. Hybrid 2 uses a cadential ending. So remember that. Hybrid 1 and 2 start with an antecedent. Hybrid 3, a compound basic idea plus a continuation. We have written that here as well. So here you have your antecedent and your consequent. Great, wonderful. Now, I have to make a compound basic idea out of my antecedent. So what changes? The basic idea and the contrasting idea are still there. I had to change my contrasting idea a little bit though, because I wanted to make sure there would be no cadence here. And if I had a 5 chord here, it's too tempting to come to 1. So what I did was I changed the harmony just a little bit so that we have a predominant and then it goes to a dominant substitute. So it's tricky, but that is not a cadence. 4 going to 3 is not a half cadence. It's very ambiguous. And then we come back to 1 where we get continuation function, just like the same exact thing from the sentence structure. So let's go ahead and listen to this one. This one is a little harder to pull off because you have to have this antecedent phrase and then it has to end in no cadence. I could have just kept a 4 chord going here and that might have been a better solution, and then I would have had to change some of this. But what I'm really trying to do is keep the spirit of the original melody. And so I wanted to keep this suspension-like material. Even though, if we look here, this is actually no longer a suspension, right? Because this is actually part of the 4 chord. I use the B flat as the root, so I called it a 4 chord instead of a 4/6 chord. Because I'm hearing this is where the 4 chord settles. But I wanted to keep the phrase more or less the same. I wanted to keep it in the spirit of Haydn's piece. So in order to do that, I created a suspension-like feature here. I raised it up a third so I can make this B flat and D consonant with this chord. And then I use a 3 chord here because I couldn't use a 4 all the way across once I made that change. Alright, let's look at hybrid 4, the compound basic idea plus the consequent. So again, here's your period. Now we have a compound basic idea, same as the previous one, but here I copied the consequent phrase from right here. So you're going to get here a hybrid of this period structure and sort of a sentence structure in a way. This becomes somewhat sentence-like because there's no cadence here. So we end up having a compound basic idea and a consequent. So remember, hybrid 3 and 4, they start with a compound basic idea. The hybrid 3 has a continuation. Hybrid 4 has a consequent. We don't have a hybrid 5 that uses the expanded cadential progression, but that could be something you may want to play around with. So let's go ahead and listen to this. So I really like this one. I think this one's kind of fun because you get this compound basic idea and then you get a consequent. It almost sounds like an antecedent phrase. The only thing that makes it not an antecedent is a lack of a cadence here. So what I would like you to do is compose a hybrid theme. So you're going to start by composing a period, and then I want you to create a hybrid theme using the basic idea from your period. So I want you to compose using the same period. I want you to turn it into hybrid 1, hybrid 2, hybrid 3, and a hybrid 4, just like I did today. And you're going to submit those to the studio, and then if you're part of the group. If you're taking this on your own, this is just for yourself, but if you're taking this part of a group course, then you'll submit it to the studio and we will review them as they come up. Okay?